are expecting the highest level face-to-face talks today between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States, the highest level since the regime's founding in 1979. But there are still so many unknowns to these peace talks aimed at ending the 6 weeks of war. We weren't even sure whether the two sides would turn up at all. And at least that question has now been answered. An Iranian delegation arrived in the early hours of the morning, and it's led by the Speaker of Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Kalibah. The U.S. delegation will be led by Vice President J.D. Vance. He's going to be joined by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Ahead of the talks, President Trump wrote on social media, what? The Iranians don't seem to realize they have no cards other than a short-term extortion of the world by using international waterways. He was talking, of course, about the Strait of Hormuz, the vital shipping lane, one that Iran has had a chokehold of throughout this war. Only a handful of vessels are traveling through the strait each day, sending the price of oil soaring. Robert Moran is partner at Brunswick Group and a former Republican pollster and strategist. He told me what he's expecting from today's talks. Well, these talks are crucial. But unfortunately, I think my expectations are relatively low. I mean, we there, as your reporters have noted, the SC, the terms of the ceasefire, are not entirely clear. It's not entirely clear what both sides have agreed to. Your reporters have noted that the bluster that is being engaged in, I'm sure there's no trust between the two parties. And so we'll see. I mean, the president's tweets today suggest that there's maybe some hope, but that it's a very small sliver. As I mentioned, you're a former pollster. How is all of this going down, particularly with Trump supporters in the U.S.? Well, the president's supporters are going to stay with him. His MAGA base has been supportive of him throughout, famously supportive of him throughout a number of things. I think the bigger issue is independent voters, which have tended to turn against the Republican Party in the last several special elections that we've had here, which are a big flashing red light for the Republican Party for the midterm elections. So the president's team, of course, is in an interesting position. They would prefer to wind this down as quickly as possible, get a deal they can live with, and refocus on the domestic economy and on the midterm elections and hopefully get the price of oil down. They know that the American public has no appetite for boots on the ground for ground troops. On the other hand, they know they need to finish well and find a way to finish well and truly secure the strait. And so they are in a difficult position. But the president's, approval rating has dipped. It has been within the normal range for second-term presidents at this time, which is not usually good. And in our system, the midterm elections usually act as a corrective agent, and that's what we saw with Obama, with Bush, and likely with Trump as well. Well, and of course, all around the world, the impact of this is being felt. And the longer it goes on, the more that impact is felt by individuals in terms of the cost of things. This Strait of Hormuz, as we mentioned, is such a vital part of all of that. I suppose the issue of support and the amount of time this goes on for, isn't it? Do you think there is anything that would turn his sort of MAGA base strong against him? I think it's unlikely that his MAGA base would turn against him. Keep in mind there's MAGA, which would be a subcomponent of all Republicans. Then there's sort of the softer sort of traditional Republicans who might be skeptical first. But most importantly, it's the independents. But as you say rightly, that the issue here is petroleum prices. They ripple through the economy. They increase the cost of goods and services in the United States because it's such a large country. Most products are trucked to different locations. And so if you increase the energy costs, you increase the price of those goods. And that, of course, is not helpful to a party seeking support in the midterms. What is the minimum that the U.S. needs to come away from these talks with? I think, at least from what we're hearing from the administration, I think their view is the minimum is no nuclear weapons. No. Threat to the end to the neighborhood, no threat to neighbors. And then finally, having the strait be opened without tolling. Now, whether those things can be achieved or whether the two sides will sort of argue back and forth around them and it's a stalling mechanism, I think that remains to be seen. I think that if the existing surviving Iranian leadership is going to try to stall, if they attempt to stall, then they will run out of time and hostility hostilities will begin quickly thereafter. Robert Moran from Brunswick Group. Let's cross now to Islamabad, and my colleague Azadi Masheri is there for us. Over to you, Azadi. Well, so here we're expecting these highest-level face-to-face talks between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran since the founding of the regime, the revolution of 1979. But there are so many unknowns when it comes to these talks. We weren't even sure whether both sides would turn up, but at least that question has been answered. The Iranian delegation arrived in the early hours of the morning here in Islamabad, and now we do have confirmation that the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has arrived. I'm going to bring in our Pakistan correspondent, Carrie Davis, who's with me now, so we know that J.D. Vance has arrived. That information just came in a few moments ago. A lot of unknowns, but what can we actually expect? Yes, we started to sense that he might be coming in because we managed to hear, as you could hear as well, the jets that were coming in overhead, the Pakistani jets. That was the same thing when the Iranian delegation arrived just after midnight last night. In terms of the exact structure of the day, everyone here in Pakistan has been quite tight-lipped about how this day is going to run. We're still not entirely certain if they'll be in the same room together or if they will be shuttling messages back and forth, presumably using Pakistan, which of course been the intermediary throughout the course of the last few weeks, passing those messages between the Iranian delegation and the U.S. delegation. The fact that they are both here in Pakistan, I think, will be seen by Pakistan to be the first success, the first hurdle that has been overcome. As you say, there's been so much speculation in the last few weeks about whether that would absolutely happen or not, even down to the last minute when we heard from the Iranian parliamentary speaker who'd put on a message on social media last night saying that no negotiations would happen unless there was a ceasefire in Lebanon and also the free unfreezing of assets. So there are still, I suppose, some questions as well. They are all here in the country. Now, will there be any more spanners in the works? Will we start to hear further messaging about further concessions being required before they start to sit down together? We just don't know. But at the moment, they've arrived in the country. First hurdle cleared. Many more along this path. That's right. Thanks so much, Carrie. Many more, because there are a lot of sticking points when it comes to negotiations. Both sides still very far apart. I want to turn to our BBC Persian correspondent in New York, Bahman Kalbasi, to talk a little bit more about that. Bahman, good to have you. Oh, it sounds like Baham won't be available. Let's turn to Joel Gunter in Jerusalem instead. Joel, one of those sticking points is in fact what's been going on between Israel and Lebanon. Kerry did mention Mohammed Bar Alab, the Iranian Speaker of Parliament's comments that would be a precondition to any of these talks happening, sorting out a ceasefire between the two countries. What do we know right now? Well, we know now that there were some discussions last night, a talk between the two countries' ambassadors in Washington late last night. And so there is some progress there, some initial progress there. But since then, we've had strikingly different versions of events, if you like, from the Lebanese and Israeli side. Lebanese officials saying that there had been agreement for talks on a ceasefire to happen next Tuesday in Washington. The Israeli ambassador, by contrast, saying that there would be no ceasefire, and Israel was absolutely not committed to direct talks about a ceasefire with Hezbollah. So there does appear to still be an impasse there. This goes back, of course, to the very beginning of this ceasefire process between the U.S. and Iran, when there was confusion there, too, after the agreement of that temporary deal about whether a ceasefire in Lebanon was key to that deal. And since then, that has continued to overshadow that process. And Israel has continued to bombard Lebanon, and Hezbollah has fired some rockets in retaliation. What Israel is essentially saying is we're told we're open to direct talks, but we retain the right to continue bombing in Lebanon as we see fit in the meantime. And Lebanese officials have made it clear, somewhat understandably, that they don't see that as a good foundation for peace talks. And Joel, could you remind us of the importance of Hezbollah to Iran, part of that axis of resistance? Why do they care so much about what is going on that border? Yeah, Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant and political group, very, very powerful within Lebanon, is one of Iran's proxy groups in the region, along with Hamas in Gaza and the Houthis in Yemen, and all are seen as key to Iran's regional influence and receive funding from Iran. It has been, as I was saying, a key sticking point for Iranian officials. They were clearly insisting from the outset of this negotiation process with the U.S. Over the past few days for a temporary ceasefire there, that Israel halting its strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon was seen by them as absolutely key. For Israel, though, they also see it as key. They will say, Israeli officials will say that along with Iran, Hezbollah is an existential threat to Israel. It fires rockets into the north of Israel, and it has continued to do so. And it is honestly at this point hard to see the prime minister here, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Israeli officials agreeing to simply cease their operations against Hezbollah, remove their troops from the south of Lebanon to facilitate this deal between the U.S. and Iran. But we may see increased U.S. pressure on Israel to do so in order to see that U.S.-Iran deals succeed. Right, Joel? Thank you so much for that. I just want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture here, because of course these talks are coming after 6 weeks of war. And with me is Muhammad Ali, a national security expert here in Islamabad. Thank you for your time. The bigger picture here, what's going on between the United States and Iran, the war between Israel and Iran as well. It's not just about them. This is having huge implications for the region as well, isn't it? Absolutely. I think this war is simultaneously afoot, at least in 3 domains. One is the battlefield, which is the kinetic aspect, which thankfully has stopped for some time. The second is obviously the very intense global multilateral diplomacy. And when the U.S. vice president talks to the Iranian side, they are conscious of at least 50 countries supporting this diplomatic effort in the last almost 48 hours. And the third aspect is a very huge cost, unaffordable cost that this war has inflicted on the entire global economy. I mean, the fuel prices have risen in London and in Washington. Nobody is affected. So I think what makes me hopeful for this peace process is that the vice president of U.S. has physically arrived in Islamabad, indicates that the political cost of failure would also be very high. And one quick comment, I think the onus and the incentive for the U.S. vice president to succeed these talks is perhaps more than even President Trump. And why I'm saying is it because he could very well be the potential presidential candidate from the Republican Party next year, and he could, market it before his constituency that it's him who ended this war, started by his president. Yes. So a lot of hopes, Muhammad Ali. Thank you so much. I want to turn now to Bahman Kalbasis, who I believe we do now have in New York. Bahman, we just heard of all the hopes when it comes to these talks, but it is really uncertain, isn't it? What could come of them? Because there are so many sticking points and issues where the two countries are still very far apart. There are, and some of those demands by the Iranian side obviously are not there to actually be met, but may be dropped in exchange for other demands that United States has put on table that Iranians view as maximalists. For instance, the U.S. forces leaving or reparations being paid directly from U.S. to Iran. But nobody should expect that the Iranians now give more to the U.S. side on the nuclear file than they did before this war. What they offered there was to dilute much of or all of the 400-pound, 400-kilo, a more than 400-kilo enriched uranium to 60%. So make it impossible for it to ever be used in a bomb, and one has to assume that that's what they're going to bring on the table, but they would exact a high price for it, and most importantly, a complete and full lifting of all sanctions. So the Iranians have come with certain demands that aren't going to be that different from before this war started. They have added some demands because of the war, which probably will not be met. But they feel they have a stronger hand to play because the chokehold on Strait of Hormuz. So whether that will lead them to overplay their hand, they have done that before. Both sides have done it. We look at the Biden administration's negotiations with Iran to restore the nuclear deal, and both sides missed an opportunity to do so because every time one thought they had a better hand to play, and they overplayed it. So that, and then obviously millions of people in Iran looking at this with fear and anxiety. One sectors of society that watched their children being massacred in January doesn't want to see a deal at all because they think that will entrench the regime, and the other sectors of the society who want to see some economic relief. It's a mixed bag and mixed feelings into across Iran. So these representatives arriving, the government representatives arriving, have a very complicated task before them. And Bahman, exactly in terms of what Iranians are viewing this as they're watching these talks from Iran and use the word they're talking about the regime. Has there been regime change as Donald Trump is claiming? Because at one point it felt like he stopped talking about regime change. Now he sees that he's saying that there are new people at the top. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei killed. But is this truly regime change? How do people in Iran see it? They see it as a mockery of what regime change is. So the short answer is there has not been a regime change. And in fact, the policies have not changed. We've seen even in the last few weeks how many protesters were executed in Iran, and the internet shutdown continues. The longest blackout. We're now more than 1,000 hours into this unprecedented blackout of internet. Tens of millions of people cut off from the world. Those are the realities Iranians are living with right now, and that is the result of a regime that continues to be in power and to crack down on any dissent. So that's the reality they're dealing with. But the fact is the president of the United States thinks these are new people is baffling to them, and they don't know where it's coming from. And these negotiators are going to put on the table isn't going to be markedly different from what the previous negotiators, some of them present in Islamabad right now, put on the table. So in fact, the only thing we've seen is continuity from the regime, and if anything, more brutality, not less. Yes, the Iranians I've spoken to inside have said they're worried about what life will look like under more hardline figures like the ones we're seeing today. Bahan, thank you so much for that. So a lot of concerns about what could come after these talks, a lot of unanswered questions. There is the hope that perhaps this fragile ceasefire at the very least could hold, that maybe some progress can be made after 6 weeks of war. But remember, the United States and Iran were talking and at the negotiating table in February before the United States walked away and launched this war alongside Israel. Lucy, back to you in the studio. Okay, thanks very much, Azad Mashuri, for us.